We've actually reached something of a double milestone in our ponderings through the Psalms. First, and it's certainly not the most important fact, this is, as it happens, the 200th of these ponderings. More significantly, much more significantly, we have reached the last of the 15 songs of ascent. And so next time we'll move on from here to the last few psalms that bring the Psalter as a whole to an end. But I also want you to notice that once again, in this psalm, there is clear evidence that these psalms were arranged in a very deliberate and intentional manner. The Songs of Ascent, as we have seen, is a collection of songs that the Old Testament pilgrim worshippers sang as they traveled from all over the nation and even further afield for that matter, and made their way to Jerusalem and the tabernacle or temple for the great worship feasts of the nation. As they got closer and closer to the end of their journey, the emphasis on worship in these psalms seems to become stronger and reaches its climax in this, the briefest of psalms. In fact, this is the shortest of all the psalms after Psalm 117. But it doesn't end there. The theme of worship is what dominates and connects the final 16 psalms in our book of Psalms, as it moves towards a great crescendo of praise and worship in 150. So Psalm 134 closes the Songs of Ascent, but in many ways introduces the final selection of psalms. Please notice too the close similarity between the opening verse of 134 and the opening verses of 135. And see how 135 ends with that repeated call to bless the Lord that 134 began with. So here at the end of the Songs of Ascent is what we often begin our worship services with, a call to worship. So verse 1 tells us who should worship. All you servants of the Lord who stand by night in the house of the Lord. You know, I was wondering whether this last Song of Ascent was actually sung by the worshippers as they prepared to leave Jerusalem and go back to their homes, knowing all the time that they would not be back in the tabernacle or temple for many months. And so they exhort the priests and the Levites who permanently live and work there to keep the worship of God going. 1 Chronicles tells us that the Levites served in the temple, quote, day and night. Now, in this new covenant era in which we live, thankfully, we don't have or need priests or Levites. We are a kingdom of priests, says the scriptures. And every true child of God has an equal privilege of access to God and a call to serve and worship Him personally. And very few of us live or work in church, literally. So this is for us, surely, a call to every believer, every Christian, to be a 24/7 worshiper, but also to make the corporate gatherings of worship a high priority in our lives. After all, worship is the very thing we were created to do. Our chief end is to glorify God. But in Tozer's famous words, worship has become the missing crown of the evangelical church. Today, worship wars are commonplace, as it has all too often become measured by what we get out of it, rather than how we bless God in and through it. The point of worship is, in the psalmist's words, to bless the Lord. Then in verse 2, how we should worship. Lift up your hands, he says, to the holy place. Now in Bible times, raising your hands in worship towards heaven was commonplace, even the norm for worshippers. It is a physical, a sort of enacted indication of a spiritual attitude in which we focus our hearts and minds on God and look to Him as we give Him our worship. So it's stressing that worship is meant to be God-centered, not man-centered. If there's one thing missing, it seems to me, from the vast majority of church gatherings today, whatever their denominational affiliation or style of worship, it is this. What's missing is that sense of the fear and presence of God, that awareness that we have, as a little song puts it, that we have come into this place to lift up holy hands and worship Him. When I was a student at Bible college, I served under a wonderful mentor who began many worship services with words like this: "Oh God, as we come into your presence to worship you, make us aware that we are in the presence of God, and make us aware of the God in whose presence we are." Finally, says the psalmist, what happens when we worship God as we should? Well, verse 3, God blesses us. We don't worship God in order to receive a blessing. But the reality is that if we worship God in the right way, then He graciously blesses us.